نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم ما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Yes, I'm trying something a little bit different. You see, when I go live streaming on Twitter and I use my iPad, I then try to save the video so I can upload it onto YouTube. Problem is, I can't seem to save the video. So I've tried different techniques. So if anybody knows, they can assist me, please. I've tried different techniques. It doesn't work. So I did two videos. One I did on the Qadiani issue a couple of weeks back, which came on Twitter, but then I couldn't upload it onto YouTube. And then last week I did one on the Qurbani issue. Again, came out on Twitter, but I couldn't download it. So what I'm doing now is I'm iPadding the Twitter and I'm YouTube laptoping the YouTube. So this time at least, inshallah ta'ala, it should go right. Anyway, what's the title for today? The title for today is Will BoJo Find His Muslim Mojo? Obviously, this week we know that Boris Johnson, I don't know if you've got his name then, we found out that Boris Johnson became the leader of the Conservative Party. Obviously, it was quite clear that he was going to be the leader of the Conservative Party. But what we're finding is on various groups that people are on, or WhatsApp groups and things of that nature, people are kind of forwarding his Islamic heritage or his Muslim history. There seems to be a sort of desire or expectation that Boris Johnson is going to suddenly bring the Sharia into, or at least he's going to be more kind towards Muslims. Unfortunately, this has been a little trap that we catch ourselves as Muslims in time and time again, where our expectations are on other people rather than on ourselves. Now, we don't need to look far. For example, if we look at Sadiq Khan or Sadiq Khan, from who is the London Lord Mayor, then we've not seen any Islamification of London. In fact, he will feel somewhat more paranoid and arguably would take a distance from anything which would give the impression that he is promoting Islam, because obviously of his critics who will be on his case. Similarly, we have Sajid Javed, who is in the Conservative Party. And again, very similarly, you will see that he would make extra effort not to be seen as Muslim, because obviously his critics, as soon as he does anything which could remotely be considered to be Islamic, his critics will be after him, saying that he's trying to Islamify Britain. So there are two examples that we have in Britain. And obviously we have across the shores, some time back now, Barack Obama, who was the first black president. And there was again this expectation that he would tend to and cater to the needs of the Black American, or African American, as they sometimes refer themselves to. Again, we saw nothing. In fact, arguably, we saw that Barack Obama took a somewhat distant, every now and then we would see some of his black heritage coming through, but generally speaking, he distanced himself from that. Now, we have this habit, as I said, where our expectations and we rely and hope on other people. We shouldn't be like that. Unfortunately, we are. We should rely on ourselves and we should rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our expectations or our hopes and ambitions should be in Allah, that we have our expectations from Him. But that doesn't just mean that we then rest on our laurels and just leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to solve all our problems. It is up to us then to take the initiative. It is up to us to then take up the sort of the mantle, take up the baton, and start to deliver and look at our own selves. You know, we claim to be Muslims, we claim to be practicing Islam, but you don't have to look far to see how far we are, unfortunately, from Islam. Whether it's our day-to-day habits, where we live, for instance, how we engage with our neighbors and our local community, and also, when it comes to, say, crime, how our representation in prisons, I could list on and on. Now, I'm not saying that's a Muslim problem. I've written about this extensively. It is not a Muslim problem as such. It is more a socio-economic problem. But Islam is an answer. So even though Islam is not the problem, Islam is the solution. And we have that solution. So we don't adopt that. We don't practice that. So really, we're not supposed, here we are, hoping that BoJo finds his Muslim mojo. But really, who is the people that have lost their Muslim mojo? It is the Muslims themselves who've lost their mojo, who've lost their kind of way a little bit. So our hopes and our aspirations should be that we should rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's not just a case, like I said, of relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's relying upon Him, but having some practice ourselves. Now, that can both be of a spiritual aspect and also be something more practical. What we tend to do is focus more on, what change can we make? We're kind of very activistic type. What changes can we make? But what we fail to do is, with all that enthusiasm and energy, if the intention is not sound and if it's not utilized in an effective way, then we don't get proper results. So what we've got to be doing is first spiritually getting a correct direction, finding a direction that we need to go in. Once we've got that, then we need to start to make a change. And it's not Boris Johnson who's going to come to Birmingham, Bradford, Tower Hamlets, Burnley, or anywhere other city for that matter, and solve your problems for you. It's not going to happen. And it's not necessarily that Boris Johnson or any politician, whether he be a Lord Mayor or whether he just be a member of the parliament, is going to make that change. Muslims have always relied upon themselves, or whenever changes happen in Muslim communities, it's happened by them making those changes themselves. And that's how changes will happen in the future. So that's the kind of leadership we should take. On a separate point, as I normally squeeze in a separate point, on a separate point, we have many a times where we see, for example, people representing us. Now, there's been a government appointment this week, and also there are usually appointments that the government makes in terms of having, particularly if we take it from a Muslim perspective, giving roles to Muslims, and then our kind of aspirations and hopes are, if we know the tradition of that person, we think they will practice that tradition, and also they will use that their tradition as a means to say that, look, I am sound. So they may say, I've studied at Darul Uloom, I have studied X, I have studied Y. Now, it's not necessarily that we're questioning their credentials, and it's not necessarily that their credentials by them giving them will establish their authority as such, is whether they continue to practice that tradition. So it's also having, it's all good saying that you've been educated through a traditional way, that you've been educated in a darulum, or you've been educated at a madrasa, and therefore you are acceptable, you are sound. That's not the issue here. The issue really is the person's practice in day-to-day life. So if your practice goes against your tradition, then that does not mean that that person should be accepted just because he happens to have gone through traditional learning environment. Let me give you an example. So if we find, for instance, a person who's been to medical school, and that person's been to medical school, and when that person went through medical school, obviously at medical school they practiced medicine, and they were accepted by their teachers, they passed the necessary exams, and they were given the certification, and they were qualified within that education establishment. So when they went out into the big wide world and somebody questioned their decision, or they were given a particular post, and someone questioned and said, oh, why have you got that particular post? And they responded by saying, well, I went to so-and-so medical school and I've got so-and-so medical school certificate, and people will accept that. However, if that person then practices contrary to his medical school certificate, if he practices contrary to what he's actually done, what he's been trained up to do, what his qualification is in, then we couldn't care less if he got trained at, and I don't know the best medical school in the UK or on planet, so my apologies there, but it doesn't matter if he got trained at the Oxford or Cambridge equivalent of a medical school, let's use that as an example, and I received the best award there if he's no longer practicing what he learned. So this is a key point as well. So when we do find certain scholars or certain individuals being given positions within government or in other areas where they wish to support governmental organizations, and they claim that they deserve that post or they are entitled to that post because they have studied at X institute and achieved Y qualifications. And yes, that might be a fact, but we look at their practice. So if their practice contravenes their tradition, if their practice goes against what they actually studied and what they learned, then it does not matter where they studied. It does not matter what they studied. What becomes essential then is their practice. So two little sort of snippets which tie into together for today, inshallah. One is, BoJo does not need to find his Muslim mojo. Muslims need to find their own mojo and become responsible and take ownership of their own futures. That's essential. Secondly, just because an individual who may have been trained in a traditional way and qualified or graduated from a traditional scholarly environment, learning environment, but then his actions go contrary to that, does not mean that that person should be accepted whole piece. We look at that person's practice. So rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, judge individuals or judge people there in terms of what they do, in terms of their practice, and don't expect Boris Johnson to be driving into your neighborhood to pick the litter that you've thrown on the floor. Jazakumullah khair. Ahsan al jaza. I hope I see you again, inshallah, next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi